hope that you remember those guys. Welcome to the hard question. Yes, I know somebody out there is saying, I know who that is, BQ. That's Milli Vanilli. And man, I'm telling you, it was such a disappointment to find out those guys because they were really good looking. But they couldn't sing, or maybe they could sing, but they didn't want them to sing, the people that hired them. And we have such a great show today. It's a fun show because, we've had a lot of heavy shows this week. And joining us is Michael N. Smith. And, when you think about why did people do what they did? What were the 100 biggest boo-boos in history? And joining us is Michael Smith. And Michael, you've actually called this book. Well, tell everyone the name of the book.
Well, the name of it, great to be here, by the way, BQ. The name of the book is 100 of the Worst Ideas in History. And it celebrates some of mankind's most astonishing faux pas, foibles, and foul-ups. By the way, I cleaned up that last part of it, foul-ups, okay?
But we know what you mean.
We know. And we pull from all different worlds. We've got politics, stories, pop culture, business, fashion, sports, entertainment from the recent past and distant past. And, the original printed book sold pretty well. So we decided to create an audiobook version, complete with the music, sound effects, and some Hollywood voiceover actors, because I'm located fairly near Hollywood and know these folks.
Yeah, you are. And they're not working like they used to.
No, and they're not. During COVID, they were only so happy as to put their voices to this kind of goofy, interesting, funny look at history. So, it's out there. It's very quick, easy to listen to or easy to read if you get the printed book. It's no story is more than 2 minutes and no story in the book is more than 2 pages. It's got photos in it. So it's for those people who like to be informed and maybe laugh and learn something at the same time.
Well, the thing of it is, at the time Milli Vanilli had their big faux pas. And you can tell everyone again. I mean, it was like I'm thinking of Ashley Simpson and what happened to her on Saturday Night Live. These people that lip sync, but lip syncing was very popular during the heyday of the MTV, and people didn't think about it. But remind people about what happened with Milli Vanilli.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. We call it in the book "How to Lip Sync a Music Career." SINK. And it's a bad idea. The bad idea here, and the book is full of bad ideas. This one was to create a pop music group led by 2 singers who cannot sing. It's a pretty interesting and ballsy way to go forward. And the genius behind it, as we call him, is Frank Farian, who is this uber successful German music producer. And this goes back to 1988. I was BQ. I was just a young lad at that time, and I'm sure you were as well. But I do remember the Milli Vanilli debacle. So let's say Farian, this uber successful producer, is looking for the next big thing in music, and he goes all around the Berlin club scene, and he happens upon 2 male models named Fabrice Morvan and Rob Pilatus, tearing up the dance floor. And to most people, they're, hunky, prancing. They were good-looking guys.
They were pretty-looking guys. They were good-looking guys. They did look like models.
They look like they were models, and they're, to many people, they were just kind of hunky, prancing boy toys. But to Farian, this producer, they're ideal frontmen for a new band, and soon the pop group Milli Vanilli is born.
Yeah.
So there's one problem. Neither Rob nor Fab can sing. So to cover that rather glaring deficiency,
hilarious.
Yeah, Farian secretly hires professional vocalists to record all of the Milli Vanilli songs, and he directs Rob and Fab to lip sync to these recordings whenever they are performing live. So that sustained for some period of time until this, we call it this hip-hopping missile came to a crash. And that was at a 1989 MTV live concert where both Rob and Fab are lip syncing and gyrating to their big hit, Girl, You Know It's True. I'm sure, BQ, you remember that one.
I do.
And when they're singing, the recording skips. And it forces them to repeat the same line over and over again live on stage. So it's like, girl, you know it's, girl, you know it's, girl,
exactly.
you know it's. And the fraud is then exposed.
And it's so sad, as you call it, the day the disco died. The other thing is, you were talking about they were discovered in Berlin. And if you think about some of the great, and you write about one of them, about the Beatles, the big boo-boo, that this decision for the Beatles of this drummer that was playing in the cavern. I'll let you tell the story about Pete Best.
Yep, Pete Best was a drummer, and we call this one Pete does his best to avoid the long and winding road to superstardom.
Oh, boy.
And his bad idea is that he refuses to dress like, talk to, or generally fit in with his soon-to-be huge bandmates. And this dude is Pete Best.
Yeah.
And he's drummer for the Quarrymen. That's the name of the group, the Quarrymen. And this goes back to just about 1960. So as his bandmates, wear leather jackets and coif their hair in a mop top style, he wears short sleeves and sticks with his naturally curly hair. They hang out together, but Pete saunters off alone. So in light of his steadfast, he was kind of a quiet, kind of, not with it kind of guy. So in light of this steadfast refusal to, let's say, get with the program, he's sacked as drummer for the Quarrymen. They took a vote and they got rid of him. And that at that time was a very small, little-known Liverpool pop rock group.
Right. That played predominantly in the cavern. I know a little bit about this.
Yeah, played in the cavern, which was in Germany, correct? In Berlin, I believe. And soon after they gained a little bit of notoriety, the Quarrymen changed their name to a group we all might have heard of called the Beatles.
Oh, what an idiot, that Pete Best. He's probably kicking himself. And of course, then they hire Ringo, who a lot of people say was not as an accomplished drummer as Pete Best, but he had that nice little face with the big nose and the big eyes, and everyone fell in love with him.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of people speculated that they got rid of Pete Best, not necessarily because he was, let's say, not up to snuff when it came to being a drummer and didn't want to fit in with the gang, but rather because they were jealous. John and Paul were, and maybe even George to an extent, were jealous of him because he was the really kind of good-looking one. And all of the chicks kind of cheered him and hotly pursued him. So I think it was at least partially jealousy that they got rid of him, and they brought in, let's face it, the sort of homely, everyman Ringo Starr to be the new drummer. Now, obviously, Ringo was a decent drummer, but some fans wonder if they might have even been better with Pete Best. Now, of course, Pete, through the years, was kind of hurt and bewildered by the firing.
Okay.
He turned down an offer from Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, to start a new band. He just kind of sits home and sulks, and he's reluctant to venture outside and, as we say, face the music about his dismissal.
And the interesting thing when you say that to me, because you bring up Brian Epstein. Brian Epstein was the genius who pretty much was the driving force with that British sound, whether it was Jerry and the Pacemakers, a lot of those guys, the Mercy Beat, they used to call it.
Mercy Beat, yep.
And the thing of it is, when you talk about these 100 kind of bad ideas, the question is knowing when to take a chance when you think, I'm better than this, I'm not going to do this. And you look back and you think, how could I have been so dumb?
Well, I'll tell you the really dumb thing that Pete did, in addition to just not getting with the program, is in desperation after, he had tried to form his own band, the Pete Best combo. It didn't go anywhere, it didn't do much. So in desperation, he records an album, let's say not so cleverly titled Best of the Beatles.
Oh, my.
It's a ham-handed play on his last name and his former band. So believing that the album was the first greatest hits album by the Beatles, people went out and bought it, and boy, were they, shall we say, unhappy when it was just Pete Best drumming.
Yeah, no kidding. And I'm surprised it didn't sue him. The other thing is, I don't know if you've covered this. I'm waiting for my copy of the book to arrive, but a lot about the Beatles. Remember when Paul McCartney married Linda Eastman, and Linda Eastman they turned off all of the other voice tracks. And because Paul and Linda were singing together, and they played her voice track, and it was horrible. I mean, it was a really terrible, Yeah, it was awful. And so consequently, I mean, these guys were so popular, a lot of these women wanted to buy into their fame, much like Yoko Ono.
Oh God, yes. It's a funny thing that in both John and Paul's case, they married people who they sort of brought into the band, and you could argue that it didn't bode well for the Beatles as a group, because I think there were some resentments. George wasn't happy with Yoko, and Paul wasn't happy with Yoko, and then John wasn't all that happy with the girls, and eventually Linda that Paul would bring around. And I think it contributed to what was essentially a fairly short-lived group that had tremendous impact on the music scene.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about with our guest. It is 100 of the worst ideas in history. And Mike, I know you're going to stay with us a bit longer, and you're going to tell everyone when we come back how they can get it. I'm Blanketha Cullum. This is The Hard Question.
Welcome back to The Hard Question on Smart Talk.
Ruth lets go the fatal throw, and the Babe socks it into the bleachers for his first homer of the series. A mighty smash, bringing his team a lead of 3 runs and starting the avalanche, which gave the Yanks 7 and Chicago 5 when the game was over.
And that is the fabulous Babe Ruth. His history, incredible. But some people talk about the Babe Ruth curse. Well, we're joined here by such a spectacular guy, Michael N. Smith. And he and a partner have written a book, which I absolutely cannot wait to read, called The 100 of the Worst Ideas in History. And now they even have, you can listen to it online. You can get an ebook. And tell us about the Babe, Michael.
Well, the Babe is an interesting story. And by the way, thanks for having me on, BQ. We call this story the Bambino's Curse on the Beantown Bombers. And the bad idea was to sell pitcher Babe Ruth, and yes, he was a pitcher in those days, to the New York Yankees. And the genius, as we say, behind it is Harry Frazee, who was a Broadway producer and owner at that time of the Boston Red Sox. And this all occurs around 1920. So here's the deal. The owner, Harry Frazee, knows that his Red Sox have scored 5 World Series titles in 15 years. So he believes his team is undoubtedly strong enough to withstand the departure of its star pitcher, Babe Ruth, also known as the Bambino.
Right.
So he's scrounging for cash, and he's a Broadway guy, and he wants to finance some of his Broadway plays. So he decides to sell Ruth to the Yankees for $100,000 in cash and $300,000 in loans. Now, in those days, that was an unthinkable amount of money. It was huge. So you can see how Frazee would be.
Oh, absolutely. Tempted. Yeah.
Yeah, very tempted to do so. So he went through with the deal. And years later, not even years later, a short time later, he can only sort of gasp in disbelief as Ruth goes on to single-handedly transform the game, becoming baseball's lifetime home run leader, the most popular athlete of his day, a charter member of the Baseball Hall of Fame, in leading the formerly downtrodden Yankees to 7 championships in 15 years. Meanwhile, the Red Sox endure 8 decades of flubs, blunders, and near misses, each attributed to the curse of the Bambino, on their way to winning 0 World Series titles between Ruth's 1920 departure and 2004.
I'm surprised they weren't offering sacrifices and, doing lighting vigil lights. You have another story that I don't know about this one, and I'm anxious to get your insight about this. And it's you talked about how a baseball game helped hasten the death of disco.
And this happened right in Chicago. And this falls under our category of major league stupidity. And this particular story is titled Disco Inferno Singes the Socks, SOX, the socks.
Yeah.
So BQ, it is July of 1979, and we're at the, let's call it the high point of the platform shoe and polyester leisure suit era known as disco.
I hate to say I remember that. It's just sad to have to admit it.
I did have a leisure suit at one time, when I was in grade school or high school back in those days. And listen, as popular as disco was, in fact, to be honest, I was a club DJ during that era when I was a young guy. Lots of people hated disco music and the whole sort of, this look at me disco attitude, especially sports fans were not really into it. So enter Chicago disc jockey Steve Dahl, and he comes up with something called, you got to hear this, Disco Demolition Night.
Wow.
And here's how it works. For 98 cents plus a vinyl disco record, you get into a Chicago White Sox baseball doubleheader. Now,
man,
between games, Dahl collects up all of the records that people brought in, piles them up in the outfield, then uses explosives to blow them to smithereens.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine the liability issue? This could never happen today. So here's the problem. Upon detonation, a crater forms in the outfield. Vinyl shards fly through the air like shrapnel. A large fire erupts. And fueled by, shall we say, booze and marijuana, the disco-despising stadium crowd then spills onto the field. Before you know it, there's a full-scale riot with fans wrecking batting cages, gouging up the turf, burning banners, punching and fighting and dancing, and everything was going on. Scores of people were injured, hundreds were arrested, and Detroit Tiger manager Sparky Anderson takes one look at the mayhem and refuses to allow his team onto the field for game 2 of the doubleheader. And that marks the last time any major league team was forced to forfeit a game. So that was an automatic loss for the White Sox, and it hasn't happened since. So,
and you got to wonder what happened to Dahl's career because in that particular period of radio, there were a lot of crazy events. I mean, they pulled so many stunts.
Oh yeah. And Bill Veeck, I believe, was the owner of the White Sox at the time, and he was all in on it. And if you go back in White Sox history, they also did a lot of stunts, including one time they brought, let's call it a little person to the plate to bat for the Chicago White Sox. And of course, the strike zone is not very high or not very wide, I should say, when you have somebody who's 3'4" batting. So he got a walk out of it. But he would do stunts like that. He would bring elephants onto the field, and this was just the latest in a long line of kind of crazy ideas they had.
See, I lived through that period. That's when my career started. I actually got kidnapped off the radio by my late ex-husband, who was a jazz guy, and they all believed it. There was a lawsuit that was kind of like a War of the Worlds. I mean, the cops were notified. They thought I'd been really kidnapped, and that's a long story. I mean, people did crazy events back then. We have so much more to talk about. It's such a fun book. 100 of the worst ideas in history, and our great guest is joining us. Michael Smith, I'm BQ, The Hard Question.
Return to the hard question on Smart Talk.
I'm telling you, once you get this book, I know already I've been trying to read every clip I can. I can't wait till I get my copy. Michael Smith, who did you co-write this with, Mike?
It's a friend of mine named Eric Hassan, and Eric was a former speechwriter for President George W. Bush. He's written for the LA Times, New York Times, CBS News. and Washington Post. So between the two of us, we had a Rolodex of really bad ideas in our head. And as a writer myself and as an owner of an ad agency, he and I come up with ideas all day long. So we have great sympathy for what it takes to come up with a good idea. And shall I say, a great deal of empathy when that seemingly good idea goes terribly wrong, because we've had plenty of those ourselves.
No kidding. And actually, I worked for both HW and W. W had a very good sense of humor. He was actually very funny and had a baseball team and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm sure that Eric had a great time working for him because on top of everything going on, he was a very nice man. But what I was fascinated about, first of all, is you talk about who was the president that liked to swim in the buff. And no, it wasn't Bill Clinton. No, I mean, he may have, you had presidents that had trysts in the closet more than Bill Clinton. But tell us about this guy that used to like to take it to the skinny dip level.
Well, we call this the president's scandalous embarrassment. Pardon the pun on that one.
Got it.
And the crude humor, shall I say.
Well, it's okay.
But BQ, this gives Crack of Dawn a whole new meaning.
Oh, no kidding.
because each morning, President John Quincy Adams sneaks down to the Potomac, undresses, and proceeds to skinny dip with the ducks and the geese, all the while naked as a jaybird.
Wow.
So a newspaper reporter named Anne Royal hears about it and hides out in the Potomac's foliage and catches the, shall we say, the unsuspecting president in the buff. She actually caught him in the buff.
Wow. And she apprehended his, shall we say, his drawers?
She took his clothes and held them for ransom until he agreed to give her a long-awaited interview he had been putting off. And of course, in those days, female reporters didn't get first dibs on interviews.
Certainly not women. Certainly not women.
Yeah, he got his clothes back and she got the interview, and she didn't really mention his, shall we say, ballsy morning escapades. But soon the word gets out, as it always does in these things.
It does, especially in D.C.
Especially in Washington. And now Adams is swimming in a pool of, shall we say, ridicule and shame. So as a result, the Adams administration's policy agenda stalls, and he's soundly defeated for re-election in 1828 by Andrew Jackson. And in the end, the electorate considered Adams' sagging credibility and saggy backside, and concludes the emperor has no clothes.
What a droopy drawers kind of story. And the other one that liked, but he didn't like to go skinny dipping in water. He liked air baths, and that was Benjamin Franklin.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. I didn't know that one. But
yeah. Franklin used to like to go around in God's own clothing and be bare naked, but he'd open all the windows. He liked air baths.
Oh, my gosh. You know what I wonder, BQ, is how any of that would have flown today. I think in the past, we just didn't know as much about their personal lives. And now we seem to know everything. And the more we know, the less we seem to be respectful of their policies and of their personalities.
Well, it's not quite as charming. And, we found out about Fiddle and Faddle, who were in the pool with Kennedy. We find out about the stain in the dress with Monica Lewinsky. I mean, they all have a tale to tell. The woman I'm trying to think in the Fanny Fox. Remember Fanny Fox and Wilbur Mills?
Oh, yeah. The tidal basin.
The tidal basin, right. Yeah. So, all right, but I have another story I want to ask you about, because I don't want time to run out and for us to not hear this story. I want to know about this confused chauffeur who helped to start World War I.
Well, this is the first story that we started with when we wrote the book, and it's a very interesting one. It's interesting because of one twist of fate, one bad decision has monumental consequences for the world. So let me tell you about it. We call it A Confused Chauffeur Starts a World War. And not too many years ago, we had the 100th anniversary of World War I. So this story had resonance then, and I think it does now. So the year is 1914. And it involves let's call it a tinderbox area of the world known as Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia.
Oh yeah. Oh
the
yeah.
former Yugoslavia.
Right.
And it's an area the United States has been involved in over time, and particularly in the 1990s during Clinton administration. But anyway, in 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, not the rock group, but the actual Archduke, and he is heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which now controls this particular region of Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia. And he's parading through the streets of Sarajevo with his wife in an open-air limousine. So at the parade is a group of Serbians known as the Black Hand.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you just hear that name and you know it's not good.
Oh, and I remember this story, but I want you to share it with the folks.
Okay, the bad idea is coming. This Black Hand does not like Franz Ferdinand. They don't like anything about the Austro-Hungarian Empire sort of coming to root here and ruling over them. So they get together and they make bombs. Like in a garage or a basement, they make bombs. And yes, back in those days, the term bomb thrower was literal. I mean, these days it's sort of a euphemism for somebody who takes a verbal pot shot at somebody. But this is actually back in the day when they made bombs and threw them. So what they did is the Black Hand militants take a bomb and they toss it at Franz Ferdinand as his motorcade is passing. It misses him, but it hits some of the spectators who are standing along the parade route, and it injures about 20 to 40 people. So out of the goodness of his heart, Franz decides later that day to visit these victims of the bomb blast in the hospital and maybe offer his condolences or support or whatever. So here comes the bad idea. So he instructs his limo driver named Leopold Loika to head for the local hospital. Unfortunately, the driver has no idea where he's heading. He takes a wrong turn and comes to a stop on what is essentially a dead-end street. And that's in front of a sandwich shop. Inside the sandwich shop is one of the would-be assassins from earlier that day, one of the bomb throwers from earlier that day. He's just sitting there having a sandwich, and he looks out the window, and to his utter astonishment, he sees Franz Ferdinand sitting at a dead stop right there in front of him. So sort of like the Dirty Harry in that Clint Eastwood movie where he's chewing on a hot dog and he's got the Magnum in his other hand. He's got a sandwich in one hand, he's got a gun in the other. He heads out to the car. It's an open air car. And sadly, he shoots both Franz Ferdinand and his wife dead, killing them right there in their car. So that assassination lights the powder keg that starts World War I. Over 24 million people lose their lives. So that one wrong turn indirectly is responsible for 24 million deaths.
That's just shocking. You know, the book has so many components. It's got political, it's got entertainment, it's got medicine, all kinds of information that right now it's the kind of book I think people are anxious to read because, you know, we get kind of overwhelmed by the news that we have to face every day. But there is a very interesting statement, you know, you have on the archives building that says the past is prologue. So consequently, it's important to know what happened in the past. Mike, I want you to tell people all about the ways they can get the book. They can get it online, how they can order it, and we have a little bit of time. So, you know, tell us quickly.
Okay. Well, the book is available on Amazon. As all books are, it's the law, you know, we have to have it available on Amazon. It's on audible.com. The audiobook is there. It's got, some great extra features in it that do not appear in the printed book. The audiobook is also available on iTunes, Audible, as I said, and Amazon. And it's available at fine retailers everywhere and at 100worstideas.com.
It's just spectacular. You know, I don't know if we have maybe a minute left, but just very quickly, we've been talking about movies and maybe you can share it like about a minute. Tell me about who turned the greatest product placement opportunity in cinema history down. I'm just curious.
Well, this is a fascinating story. We call it E.T.'s Mission to Mars Aborted. And the bad idea here is to turn down perhaps the greatest product placement opportunity in movie history. And who are the geniuses behind it? Well, we call them the chocolate-covered nuts at Mars Incorporated.
Oh, right.
The candy bar people.
Right.
So this goes back to 1981. I think everybody knows the movie E.T., where
Right.
young Elliot lures E.T. out of the closet with a trail of candies.
1 minute.
So Melissa Matheson, the writer of E.T., believes, hey, that this cuddly, cute intergalactic visitor ought to be attracted to and interested in the most popular candy on Earth, which is M&Ms. But they took it to Mars, owner of M&Ms, and they said, no, we don't want an alien eating our candy. It might frighten the children. Can you imagine the stupidity? I mean, it's just...
And then they turned it was Reese's Pieces from there. There's so much in there. Mike, we're so happy you joined us. What a fun show today. We always appreciate having really great guests, and we thank you so much. Come back again, and we'll talk about more of the 100 worst ideas in history. Get the book. I'm Blanquita Cullum, and this is The Hard Question. And this is The Hard Question. And this is